In the world of live television, moments of tension, surprise, and drama can unfold at any given time. But what happens when two strong personalities clash in front of millions of viewers? That's exactly what went down when Ellen DeGeneres mocked Karoline Leavitt live on her show. But what started as a playful jab quickly escalated into something much more intense. Karoline's response was so powerful that it left Ellen, and the entire audience, speechless. Make sure to like and subscribe to stay updated on more incredible stories like this one. Now let's dive into this unforgettable moment. The scene was set. The live studio audience buzzed with excitement, the cameras rolling, and Ellen DeGeneres, as always, in control of the spotlight. Karoline Leavitt, the young and charismatic political figure, had just been invited onto the Ellen DeGeneres Show for a light-hearted interview. But no one expected the tension that would soon bubble to the surface. Ellen, known for her quick wit and comedic style, had been teasing her guest throughout the show. She made remarks about Karoline's rise to fame, her political views, and even the way she dressed. At first, Karoline took the jabs in stride, laughing along with Ellen's audience, playing along like a seasoned professional. But there was a moment, one particular joke, that pushed Karoline to her limits. "Let's be real, Karoline," Ellen began, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You're like the fresh new face of politics, right? The kind of person who's never seen a camera they didn't love. But tell me, do you ever get tired of pretending to be serious all the time?" The audience chuckled, but Karoline's expression immediately shifted. Was this just a joke, or was it a subtle dig at her character? Ellen's words were meant to be playful, but Karoline's sharp intellect quickly read between the lines. Was this more than just humor? Could Ellen be undermining her? The tension was palpable. Karoline, poised yet visibly irritated, did not respond immediately. She sat up straighter, the weight of the question hanging in the air. Ellen, on the other hand, continued to smile, not noticing the change in Karoline's demeanor. Was this just another fun moment in Ellen's world, or was it about to turn into something far more intense? What would Karoline do next? Would she let it slide, or would she confront Ellen and take control of the moment? The silence in the studio was almost deafening. Ellen, still grinning, looked expectantly at Karoline, awaiting a response. But Karoline remained composed, her eyes narrowing slightly as if carefully weighing her words. The audience held their breath, sensing the tension thickening in the air. Ellen's smile faltered, but she continued to push forward. "So, Karoline," Ellen pressed, her voice light but with an underlying edge, "we all know you love the spotlight. But does it ever get old, pretending to be the voice of reason, while everyone else is just, well, messing everything up?" Ellen's playful tone had now shifted just slightly. There was a bite to her words, and Karoline could feel it. The jab wasn't just a joke. It was an attack on her character, her hard work, and her dedication to the political cause she so passionately believed in. Ellen's audience continued to laugh, blissfully unaware of the undercurrent of hostility that was beginning to simmer. Karoline's hand tightened around the edge of her chair, her knuckles white. She had been in many heated debates, but never had she been mocked in such a public forum. Ellen, with all her fame and charm, had taken things too far. For a brief moment, Karoline's mind raced. Should she laugh it off and play along? Or should she stand her ground and show Ellen and the world that she wasn't someone to be underestimated? The latter was becoming more and more appealing with every passing second. Finally, Karoline leaned forward, her eyes meeting Ellen's with a gaze so intense it could have burned a hole through steel. The audience seemed to sense the shift in energy, their laughter dying down, replaced with a murmur of anticipation. Karoline was no longer the laughing, playful guest. She had become someone ready to take on a challenge. "Ellen," she began, her voice calm but filled with undeniable authority, "I came here today expecting a conversation, not a roast. If you think that I'm just pretending to be serious, maybe you should look a little deeper. I didn't get here by taking things lightly, or by laughing my way through life. I'm here because I've worked harder than most people can. Imagine. And I don't take kindly to anyone who undermines that. The studio went completely silent. Ellen's grin faltered for just a moment, replaced by an expression of surprise. She hadn't expected Karoline to come back with such force. Was this the same young woman she had been mocking just moments before? Her eyes widened slightly, a flash of uncertainty crossing her face. But she quickly regained her composure, trying to laugh it off. "Well, I didn't mean to offend," Ellen said, though the tension in her voice was clear. "But you have to admit, you are kind of a perfect target for a joke, right?" The audience remained quiet now, unsure of how to respond. Karoline wasn't backing down. Instead, she leaned in even further, her voice now tinged with something sharper than before. "You know, Ellen," she said, "it's easy to make jokes when you've been in the business for decades, but let me tell you something. You wouldn't be where you are without people like me who refuse to settle for the status quo. So maybe instead of mocking me, you should take a moment to appreciate how hard it is to get to the point where I am." Karoline's words hung in the air, each one cutting through the tension like a knife. Ellen's smile was now a distant memory, replaced by the faintest look of discomfort. Could Karoline actually be right? Had she gone too far with her teasing? The tables had turned, and now it was Ellen who had to rethink her approach. The audience, once unsure, now seemed to rally behind Karoline. Would Ellen continue to push, or had she just met her match? The crowd's energy had shifted completely. There was no turning back now. The energy in the room was thick, palpable. The audience, who had once been laughing along with Ellen, now seemed to be holding their collective breath. What Karoline had just said wasn't just a response. It was a challenge. A challenge that Ellen, for all her experience in handling guests, wasn't sure how to navigate. For a brief moment, Ellen's eyes flickered with uncertainty. She had spent years making people laugh, making them feel comfortable, even with tough topics. But Karoline had just flipped the script, and suddenly, Ellen found herself unsure of how to proceed. All right, Ellen said, forcing a chuckle, trying to regain control. "I see you're not here to be the punchline, huh? Fair enough, Karoline. But you have to admit, your whole image, it does leave itself open for a little bit of ribbing, doesn't it?" She laughed lightly, but there was a nervous edge to it now. Karoline's words had struck a chord, and Ellen wasn't used to being the one on the defensive. Karoline leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, her posture now radiating confidence. "I get it, Ellen. You're used to being in control of the conversation. But here's the thing. Being the funny one doesn't mean you're always right. And poking fun at someone doesn't mean you're clever. It just means you're avoiding the real issues." Ellen's eyes narrowed. She was used to being the one to control the room, to steer the conversation in the direction she wanted. But Karoline wasn't letting that happen. She wasn't just a guest in Ellen's world, she was challenging it. And that was something Ellen hadn't prepared for. The host quickly recovered, masking her discomfort with a forced smile. "Well, I'm sure you've had your share of, let's call them, tough conversations. How do you deal with all the stress, Karoline? How do you handle the pressure?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "I deal with it by sticking to my principles. I know that not everyone's going to agree with me, and frankly, I don't expect them to. But when you get knocked down, you get back up. It's called having integrity." Ellen's face softened for just a second, a flicker of something almost resembling respect passing across her features. She had heard that term, integrity, thrown around so many times before, but hearing it from Karoline so unapologetically and firmly gave it weight. It was a reminder that some people were in it for more than the fame, the jokes, and the light-hearted banter. Karoline was here for something real. "Well, I guess that's admirable," Ellen replied, though her tone had lost some of its earlier playfulness. "But how do you plan to convince people who aren't as steadfast as you? People who want the easy way out or don't care about the cause. The question hung in the air for a moment, and for a second Karoline thought about it. It wasn't a question she had been asked in a while, especially not in such a public way. But here she was, and she knew exactly how to answer. Ellen, you don't convince people by playing to their insecurities. You don't make change by pandering to their fears. You make change by standing firm, by showing them a vision of something better. I didn't come here to win a popularity contest. I came here because I believe in what I'm doing. And I'm not backing down because it's hard. The weight of her words settled into the room. The audience, once skeptical, now felt the gravity of what Karoline was saying. This wasn't just about her. It was about a message, a cause, a purpose. It was something much bigger than the petty jokes or the celebrity-driven drama that Ellen usually thrived on. Ellen, who had spent the better part of her career making light of serious topics, now found herself at a crossroads. She had mocked Karoline, thinking it would be just another easy moment of comedy. But Karoline had turned the tables, reminding everyone in the room that there were battles worth fighting, and there were principles worth standing up for. The smile that had once been so confident on Ellen's face now seemed to fade, replaced by something more contemplative. Was it possible she had misjudged Karoline entirely? Ellen was about to respond, but the shift in energy was undeniable. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore, they were listening. They weren't laughing at Karoline, they were respecting her. And that was a change that even Ellen could feel. The silence in the room stretched on for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't awkward, not in the way one might expect after a confrontation, but rather filled with a quiet intensity. The tension had shifted. It was no longer about who could get the loudest laugh or who had the quickest wit. Now it was about the weight of words and the truth that lingered in the air. Ellen, despite her years of hosting, felt the shift too. The dynamic had changed. She had always been the one to guide her guests, to steer the conversation to where she wanted it to go. But Karoline wasn't just playing the game. She was rewriting the rules, and Ellen knew it. With a deep breath, Ellen leaned forward, her smile faltering just slightly. "So you think integrity is the key to making change? How do you really expect to get through to people who don't care about that?" she asked, her voice softer now, more reflective. Karoline didn't hesitate. "Because, Ellen, change isn't about the loudest voice in the room. It's about the one who's willing to stand up, even when it's hard. It's about showing up every day, even when everyone else is too scared to take a stand." The words rang out with such certainty that even Ellen couldn't deny the impact they had. Karoline wasn't just some politician or activist with a cause. She was someone who believed in something bigger than herself. And she wasn't going to back down just because Ellen DeGeneres had made a joke at her expense. For a moment, Ellen stayed silent, her gaze meeting Karoline's. The audience was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. They could sense the shift, too. What had started as a light-hearted interview was now something far more intense, far more meaningful. Ellen's fingers drummed lightly on the arm of her chair. She was a professional, through and through, but there was something about Karoline's words that unsettled her. This was no longer just about making her audience laugh. It was about engaging in something real. Could she do that? "Well," Ellen said after a long pause, her voice steadying, "I've got to admit, I didn't expect this conversation to go quite this way." Her gaze lingered on Karoline, and for the first time that night, it was more than just a polite smile. It was a genuine look of acknowledgement. "But you've got a point. Maybe I've spent too much time laughing things off when I should have been listening." Karoline met her gaze without hesitation, her voice calm but resolute. "Sometimes, Ellen, laughter can be a shield. It's easy to hide behind humor. But eventually, you have to face the hard truths, and you can't do that unless you're willing to get uncomfortable." The audience, who had been hanging on every word, began to stir. Some shifted in their seats, others leaned forward. The mood had undeniably changed, and now people weren't just watching. They were learning. They were feeling the weight of the conversation, the truth that Karoline was laying out in front of them. Ellen glanced at the camera briefly, then back at Karoline. The playful energy that had once filled the studio was gone, replaced by something more serious, something deeper. "I think I might have underestimated you, Karoline. I really do." For a moment it seemed like the world had paused. The tension was so thick that it was almost tangible. Would Ellen acknowledge that Karoline had won this exchange, or would she deflect like so many times before? Karoline didn't wait for Ellen to backpedal. She wasn't there to force Ellen to apologize. She was there to make a point, and she had done it. The message was clear. Integrity and courage weren't just buzzwords, they were the foundation of real change. "Underestimation is fine," Karoline said, her voice softening but still strong. "As long as you're willing to learn." Ellen took a breath, nodded slowly, and finally, the smile returned. Not the scripted one she was so famous for, but something real. Something that acknowledged the shift in the room. "I guess we all have something to learn, don't we?" And, in that moment, the dynamic between them had changed forever. Ellen had underestimated Karoline Leavitt, but Karoline had taught her a lesson that could not be ignored. The camera zoomed in, catching every subtle shift in expression. The studio, usually filled with vibrant energy and laughter, now felt like a different place altogether. Ellen's posture had changed. Her typical confidence was tempered with a humility that was rare to see on her show. The playful jabs and teasing tone that had marked the interview were gone, replaced by something far more respectful, and dare we say, admiring. Karoline didn't bask in the moment. She wasn't interested in proving anything more. Her response had been made, and the ball was now in Ellen's court. For a brief instant, Karoline's eyes flickered toward the audience, silently reading the room. She knew that this wasn't just about her or Ellen anymore. It was about something far bigger. It was about the impact of their words and the space they were creating in this conversation. The show's live audience, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, now started to murmur. The words integrity and honesty had struck a chord. People had been expecting another light-hearted interview with a sprinkle of humor, but what they got instead was a hard-hitting reminder of the importance of staying true to one's values. Karoline had become a symbol of something much larger than herself. She wasn't just a political figure. She was someone who, in that brief moment, had captured the power of speaking with conviction. Ellen, never one to back down from a challenge, now found herself at a crossroads. She could easily make a joke, crack a witty remark, and return to the safe territory of her usual persona. But something told her that doing so would be a disservice, not just to Karoline, but to herself and her audience. There was something here worth exploring, something worth acknowledging. With a deep breath, Ellen leaned in slightly. "You know, Karoline," she began, her voice softer than it had been all night. "I think we both might have learned something tonight." Karoline nodded, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I think we both did. And maybe that's the point, Ellen. We don't always have to agree, but we do have to listen. And when you listen, you learn." The energy in the room had shifted from one of discomfort to one of mutual respect. It wasn't about winning the argument or having the last word. It was about understanding. For the first time that evening, Ellen allowed herself to truly absorb the words coming from her guest. The realization was almost palpable. Ellen smiled, and this time it wasn't the smile of a talk show host, but of someone who had been affected. "You're absolutely right. Maybe we all need a little more of that in our lives. Just listening. Truly listening." The audience, who had been hanging on every word, now erupted into applause. It wasn't the usual clapping that followed, a joke or an upbeat moment. This was something deeper, something more genuine. People were applauding not just for the words that had been said, but for the shift they had witnessed. Karoline Leavitt had done more than just defend herself against Ellen's mockery. She had flipped the script, turning a moment of public humiliation into one of profound education. As the applause died down, Ellen gave a nod, acknowledging the moment. "Well," she said, "I think we've just had one of the most unexpected conversations I've ever had on this show. Thank you, Karoline. Thank you for reminding us all what it really means to stand your ground and stay true to your values." Karoline offered a small smile, but her eyes remained steady. "Thank you, Ellen, and thank you for listening." With that, the show wrapped up, but the impact of the conversation lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. It wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was a moment of growth for both of them, and for anyone who had watched. In the world of flashy headlines and viral moments, this was something real. And as the credits began to roll, one thing was certain. The world had just witnessed a pivotal moment of change. Karoline Leavitt had faced mockery, stood her ground, and turned the tables in a way that no one could have predicted. And in doing so, she had delivered a lesson that went beyond politics, beyond fame, and beyond entertainment. It was about the power of staying true to yourself, no matter the odds.